Good morning. This is Darrell Gunter, your host for Leadership on WSOU 89.5 FM and streaming on the net at WSOU.net. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so pleased that we have Mr. Raymond J. Haggerty, who is one of the gurus of IP, intellectual property, and IC. He's part of our series, IC, Intellectual Capital, by the way. Raymond, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for your effusive introduction, Darrell.
So before we jump into intellectual property, intellectual capital, could you share with our audience a little bit about your phenomenal background, education and background?
I began my career as an electrical electronic engineer, and I was working in manufacturing and technical development with an international career in lots of different countries, including 5 or 6 years working in Japan. Along the way, I also picked up postgraduate qualifications in business and law. And that combination of legal, technical, and commercial are a very good combination for the business of intellectual property. So I ended up in licensing in intellectual property, where I was licensing patents and trademarks over the years in billions of dollars of transactions.
Wow. And where did you do your formal education?
I did my formal education in Ireland, in the National University of Ireland, and in Strasbourg in France.
Oh, wow. Very nice.
Where I did a master's in IP law.
Whew, what a background. And you're right. So you talk about legal, technical, and a business combination, which is phenomenal. So you are one of the thought leaders of IP and IC, intellectual capital, intellectual property. Could you? I think everybody understands what intellectual property is, but I don't think folks are too familiar with intellectual capital. Could you define that for us?
Okay, well, if you think of the word capital, you've got two words, intellectual and capital. So capital is something that confers a benefit or value to the owner. And intellectual capital is the total sum of the information resources available to a company that can drive improvements to the business or attract new customers. It can drive profits. It can help you create new products.
So when you think about intellectual capital, IC, as we like to say, what are some of the key principles of intellectual capital?
There's 3 main areas of intellectual capital. There's human capital, relational capital, and structural capital. So the human capital is things like the innovation capacity, know-how, skills, and experience. The relational capital is about customer relationships, supply chain relationships, licensing agreements. And structural capital can cover things like systems, processes, patents, trademarks, copyright, that type of thing.
Very nice, very nice. And so I get this question all the time from people when I tell them that I'm doing a series on intellectual capital. They'll ask me, so what's the difference between intellectual capital and intellectual property?
Yes, well, as I said, we've got the structural capital, the human capital, and the relational capital. IP, intellectual property, comes under that first one there, structural capital. But if you only focus on the intellectual property in your company, you may miss out on the richness of intellectual capital that is outside the areas of intellectual property.
Okay. And so when you think about intellectual capital, for any company, why is understanding intellectual capital and capturing the value of intellectual capital, why is that so important? How can that benefit a company?
Well, if you think of how you manage a company, what gets measured gets managed. And if you're only measuring the intellectual property, as I said, you can miss some of the possibilities. If you think of your favorite caffeinated drink, or if you think of your favorite fizzy beverage, there's a trademark that's associated with that, which is intellectual property. But there's also a reputation. You know, for example, how do you feel as a person who drinks this drink? For example, if you're carrying a cup from a certain coffee company and the name is on it, it's not just the trademark, it's also what it says about you as a person. And that has a value to you as a consumer, and that may attract you. So for a company, that is something extra in their value proposition other than bare legal protections of intellectual property.
Here in the US, I don't mean to bring politics into the conversation, but the governor of New York had to resign the other day. And on the cover of the Wall Street Journal was his picture. And he was holding a Dunkin' Donuts cup where you can see the word Dunkin'. And I just, I wonder if Dunkin' Donuts, if they're happy about that or if they're sad about that because of the situation that the governor found himself in.
You're right that the reputation is very important. It also, you see situations, for example, where famous celebrities are sponsored by different companies. And if they are using the apparel of that company, that's fine. But the company who is doing that will not want to have somebody else's apparel featured in the same pictures. So using the brand association with the brand, it can be a positive association or it can be a negative association.
Right. Thinking about IC, intellectual capital, and a company's balance sheet, in your opinion, have companies begun to capture the value of their intellectual capital on their balance sheet?
There are provisions in accounting law under the international accounting standards. IAS 38, for example, does make provision for accounting for intangibles. But most people who are working in accounting even, they learn about IAS 38, but once they become accountants, they stop using it. So very often they will expense the creations of intellectual property, which ends up in your profit and loss, but it doesn't end up being captured in the balance sheet.
I see. But is it captured sometimes in goodwill or amortization?
Yes. So, but again, as I said, what gets measured gets managed. And if everything is all thrown into this one bucket of goodwill, you don't know what's in there and it's hiding the picture. If you want to get technical on it, I've dealt with situations where you may have a portfolio with 10 patents in the portfolio and 9 of the 10 patents are worth, $10,000 each. And another one is also worth $10,000, but that's the one that's bringing in all of the revenue. So what is measured in your accounting system, they may all look the same, but the one that's bringing in all of the value is severely undervalued. And conversely, you may find that the other ones are now obsolete, but they're still being carried in your balance sheet as having some kind of a value, even though they might not be contributing anything to the company. So putting everything in one big bucket of goodwill doesn't tell you which are your superstars and which are the things that are maybe costing you money to maintain.
Wow. When you talk to CEOs about intellectual capital and capturing it on their balance sheet, what is their typical response? Do they understand it? Do they see the value in capturing this intellectual capital and getting their CFO to adopt new standards?
Unfortunately, the CEOs are busy with a lot of things. And my experience is that a lot of them think that this is something for their legal department. So you're now in a situation with high growth technology companies where the value in the company can be 80 or 90% intangible. And they've handed over the ownership and the management of all of those intangibles to the least entrepreneurial department in the company, which is the legal department.
Wow.
I found when I wrote 3 books on IP strategy. And even though they were focused on the business approach to IP strategy, and that I wanted to have them classified as business books, Amazon's artificial intelligence classifier classified them as legal textbooks. So you can see that whenever you talk about intangibles, and even when you talk about it as intellectual capital, and you're saying this is capital, everybody thinks, oh yes, this is something that has to be handled by the lawyers and doesn't need to be managed by anybody else.
I see. So Areopa has established this intellectual asset banking model, utilizing intellectual capitals to help companies fund growth. In your opinion, how will the intellectual asset banking change the way companies obtain funding?
That's a very interesting question. Most companies, if they're looking for funding from a bank, the bank is happy to lend the money as long as it's secured by some assets. Now, back in the 1970s, when more than 80% of your assets were tangible, and that's things like cash, buildings, land, machinery, inventory, banks were very happy to lend based on tangible assets as the security. And they had no understanding of the intangible. And for all the time when intangible was a very low value, that didn't matter so much. But now we're in an age where these high growth companies, they can be 80, 90, even 99% intangible. They don't have tangible assets. And they go to the banks and say, we have these valuable assets. And the bank manager is saying, sorry, I don't understand it. And because they don't understand it, they're not prepared to take the risk. So this new model that's being proposed by Areopa is interesting because Areopa's fund will take the risk for the bank. And the bank doesn't have to worry about the risk anymore, and they can be more comfortable in lending on that basis.
And so what are some of the finer points of Areopa's intellectual asset banking in regards to the guaranteed fund? What are your thoughts in regards to how the guarantee will be put in place to give the banks the confidence?
Well, one thing which is very interesting is that Areopa has got a very good understanding of the value of those assets that most other people don't understand. And another key part of it is that a condition of this guarantee is that you must have a knowledge manager inside. So Areopa will take an active role in ensuring that the company is managing their own intangibles in a structured way. So that gives predictability. So it not only is protecting the asset, but it's also giving the possibility to enhance the asset actively.
So then the CEO and the CEO and the executive team of the participating company, they would have bought into the intellectual capital discussion as well as best practices with that knowledge manager who would be inside the corporation.
Yes. Peter Drucker was my mentor, and one of the things that he kept saying over and over again is what gets measured gets managed. And to be able to measure the intangibles, this is something that the Areopa model is bringing. It's bringing a higher awareness of what are the key things that need to be managed and how to measure them and how to manage them. And that is something which has been lacking up until now. And I think that will revolutionize the approach to a structured approach to innovation.
As you are one of the leaders of this IC movement, intellectual capital movement, what are some of the key things that the leaders of IC need to do over the next 12 to 24 months to educate the business community?
I think, well, money talks. So the fact that companies will have more access to funding is a major incentive. It also means that the knowledge that's being developed internally is going to be recognized more as well. And that does very good things for the morale of the people inside the company, who sometimes they're not recognized for the contribution to the success of the company. So this has got a positive reinforcement effect on the culture, that you're celebrating creativity and it draws out more creativity, which increases the value. So it's a positive reinforcing cycle.
Wow. Okay. I see. I see. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here with Mr. Raymond Haggerty, who is an expert in intellectual property and intellectual capital. And Raymond, currently, where are you based?
I'm based in Dublin, Ireland. But as you know, intellectual property, it's a global business. So I go where the ideas are, which is everywhere.
Everywhere. And you have mentioned that you have written 3 books. Can you share with us those 3 books and what was the objective of each of those books?
Yes, the first book was a book called Intellectual Property for Executives. And originally, I had that, when I was writing the book, I was aiming it at all kinds of executives. And because I was trying to be all things to all people, it ended up becoming very unfocused. So what I did was I refocused it on what it meant, especially from the point of view of the developments that are happening in international taxation, where it's really important to understand the role of intangibles in taxation. And a lot of the people who are working in taxation didn't understand this. So I wrote this really to give them an introduction to what is this intellectual property stuff. I also wrote a book called Billion Dollar IP Strategy, which is designed to be, you can read it on a 2-hour flight. So it's designed to be something which is consumed very quickly by very busy executives. And my most recent book last year was IP Fantasia, which is a book about post-pandemic innovation. So I've been gratified to see that all three were bestsellers and have generated excellent conversations in the last few years.
Well, your third book, all three are very interesting, but your third book is really timely because of what's currently happening. What are some of the key principles of your book, your third book?
The third book was about post-pandemic innovation. And what I found during the pandemic was in the early stage of the pandemic, a lot of companies started to panic. Everything went into lockdown, economic activity ground to an immediate halt. And a lot of companies started worrying, how can we protect cash? How can we reduce costs? And they hunkered down. People working from home. Some people not just working from home, they just went home and didn't do anything. The companies who I'm working with continued innovating during that time and wanted to be in a very strong position to emerge once the world reopens again. Because they were really worried that their competitors could also be doing the same thing and you couldn't see what's happening and you want to be in a strong position when you re-emerge.
And what are some of the key principles of what those companies did during this when the pandemic hit? What were some of the key things that they did to maintain their cash flow as much as possible?
Well, the main thing is that innovation comes from your people. And the companies that I work with didn't forget that their people, they need to look after their people. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just that companies were worried, people were worried. So you wanted to reassure your team that we were all going to pull through this together and come out of it stronger at the end. Mm-hmm. So focusing on the people was a primary focus for these companies. Finding a way, there's a lag on the line. Finding a way to work from home. People are talking about working from home all the time. So how do you find a way that you can work from home? And people have been talking for decades about, people should have more remote working and we have the tools for doing this. And lots of companies said that we're thinking about it, we're looking into it. And then suddenly the companies were plunged into the situation of trying to coordinate your teams, make sure people got the same access. You find on Zoom calls, for example, that certain personalities come to the fore. How do you make sure that everybody else has an opportunity to also contribute?
Right.
One of the difficulties in, having people working from home was that originally in the office, you didn't have to worry about people stepping up to the plate or not stepping up to the plate. Now you have to trust people more. So the companies that are good at trusting people and have teams of people who they realize their trust will be repaid, those are the companies that are doing very well now.
Back in 2009, Professor Amar at Seton Hall University wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review, and it was about knowledge workers. And I actually had him on the program back in 2009, and he was talking about the trust that you have with knowledge workers is that they have an objective of getting a particular job done, and they can get that job done at any time of day. But one of the challenges that traditional managers face is, like, as you said, the trust, but also how do you make sure that, like you said, if you want to manage it, you need to measure it. How do you manage and measure those employees who, you could walk by their desk and they see the boss and they go, oh, let me get off the internet, let me get back to work. But they're at home now, and they need to make sure that they're self-regulated. What are some of the lessons that you have heard from some of your clients about how they have migrated to this remote workplace and getting employees to be self-motivated?
It's an interesting, you used the last word, you said there was self-motivated. Peter Drucker used to talk about motivation, or more specifically, he used to be asked about motivation because that was the question that they asked all management gurus. And he said, I don't believe in motivation. He said, you cannot motivate people. You have to hire people. who are motivated and assume they're going to do this for you. So motivation isn't a top-down pushing on people and saying, oh, you must enjoy working harder. That doesn't work these days. So you need to have a team of professionals who each is contributing their part to the overall effort, and they need to be able to see the vision that they're contributing to.
And then, of course, to have measurements in place where you can measure the productivity of the team overall.
Yes.
And so, how does one capture the intellectual capital of remote workers? Because there's, everyone does things slightly different, and some do things slightly better than other folks. So to capture that that knowledge that will allow your customer to go through your critical path very evenly, if you will, so that the customer has a delighted experience, they pay their invoice, they're happy. How do you capture that intellectual capital?
It's an ongoing challenge. And the remote working situation possibly even highlights some of the opportunities to be able to capture this. Because when people were working in offices, the knowledge they had inside their head went home with them every day when they left the office. And if they didn't come back tomorrow, if something happened to them, or if they suddenly decided that they're leaving the company, they're going somewhere else, that knowledge had left and you hadn't captured it. Now you have the situation where it's not that they have the knowledge and they're going home. They're at home. So the question is, how can you get them to contribute their knowledge to the overall pool of knowledge? So it becomes more of an institutionalized way of doing this, that you need to think of a way to capture. And so you have the knowledge that's inside people's head. You need to capture it, store it and codify it in some way, and make it reusable for other people. Because just capturing it is of no value until other people can use it. And that's when it gets its value. And that's the beauty of intellectual property. That the intellectual capital that we talk about in the broader sense is different from physical capital. With a bicycle, you can have one person on a bicycle, you might have two people on a bicycle. Going more than two people on a bicycle is very challenging. If you own a bicycle, and if you own two bicycles, and if you give one bicycle to the other person, you now only have one bicycle again. If I have an idea and you have an idea, and if I give you my idea and you give me my idea, we now have two ideas each. So with intellectual property, you have the possibility, and with intellectual capital, you have the possibility of sharing these ideas more and broadening the value to everybody.
Is there a particular company, and if you can't disclose it because of confidentiality agreements, I understand, but is there an example of one of your clients where you saw how they captured the intellectual capital and it improved their top line and their bottom line?
Well, apart from top line and bottom line, coming back to one of the earlier questions about the balance sheet and investment, because the largest part of your value is intangible, it also means that the largest part of your risk can be intangible and invisible as well. So a lot of the investment decisions by venture capital and private equity and mergers and acquisitions, the due diligence is largely intangible. And because companies haven't been managing that effectively, they may fall down in their due diligence and they may not realize why they never got this investment in the first place.
Very nice. And you use the word risk, and risk can go both ways. If you capture it, you're de-risking your situation. But if you don't capture it, what are the risks of not capturing your intellectual capital?
Well, the simple risk is if you are based in a business that has knowledge workers and one of those workers leaves, that knowledge leaves your company. So that's already a loss to your company.
Yep.
If that worker leaves and goes to a competitor, that confers a further advantage to your competitor.
Right.
So you have got a double hit. You lose the knowledge and your competitor gains the knowledge. So that is one risk that you can see. There are other risks as well. And one of the things that I deal with when I'm dealing with high growth companies are the risks to scaling. When you are a startup, you've no money. Nobody's going to sue you. Nobody's interested in you. Nobody's going to notice you. But as you become successful, suddenly you come on the radar of a lot of people and there's a target on your back. So you can face a lot of challenges that you wouldn't have faced as a smaller company that you will face as you're scaling. As you become even more successful, you now become a threat to the very large companies who have very large firepower to be able to do things to stop you from what you're doing. So again, you need to have strategies for how to deal with those very large companies. So there are risks to scaling that very often when people only focus on intellectual property and don't look at intellectual capital, that they may not have protected for the upside risks to scaling.
Wow. Okay. I tell you, I wish we had much more time to discuss this topic because you have some extremely valuable insights and expertise. Believe it or not, we are almost at the close of the program, but I wanted to give you the last word on your thoughts about intellectual capital in leadership.
If I can give a quote on leadership, there's a really nice quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. He says, "Do not follow where the path may lead. Go instead where there's no path and leave a trail." So that's what innovation is about. It's going where there's no path and leaving a trail. And afterwards, when people see that trail, it seems that it was obvious, but there's somebody who made that trail. So the people who are trying to innovate now, don't just copy what other people are doing. Try and find a place where there's no path, make the path, and have a benefit to the world afterwards.
You know, years ago, a former colleague of mine, unfortunately, she's passed away, a phenomenal executive named Karen Hunter. I remember early on, she was executive at Elsevier, which is a big part of Relics. And she led Elsevier's transformation from print to digital. But I remember her giving a talk where she says, you can always tell the pioneers, they're the ones with the arrows in the back. You know, because when you look at that in the corporate setting or any business setting, when someone has an idea that nobody understands, they're like, wait a minute, what is he talking about? Because they can't see the light around the bend, if you will.
Yes.
And so, Raymond, how can someone get in touch with you if they wanted to have you come lecture, do some consulting? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, if you Google IP coach, I think I come up in the top search for IP coaches in the world. So that's in intellectual property. Or you can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn as Raymond Haggerty. So those are probably the easiest place to find me. Or you can come to my website, which is intaval.com. That's intangible value. So INTAVAL.com.
Wow, that is great. I really want to thank you for interrupting your day and coming on the program to talk about intellectual property and intellectual capital. Thank you so much, Raymond.
Thank you for the fascinating questions and best of luck to you with your leadership information.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps it up on this week with Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter on WSOU 89.5 FM and streaming on the net at WSOU.net. Want to wish you to have a very good weekend, but remember, leadership begins with you. WSOU 89.5 FM.